head racing season. Does anybody have any sort of final little questions or anything before we jump into that? Anything that we lingering somethings or stuff that maybe came up for Masters Nationals that you'd like to kind of query about before we? The basic of the head racing here at this point is not that intense in terms of what I'm going to talk about. So, is any rehash?
What should we do about rough water?
Good question. Well, here, so this is, in terms of race prep, so rough water is something that you're going to get. I mean, one of the downsides with the lagoon is that you get lulled into this very non-usual water conditions, which make you very complacent and has the potential, psychologically, when you get out into stuff that's not normal, to just freak out. And so it seems like I have seen this before from you guys in racing, and so there's the challenge with the lagoon is it's very difficult for me to give a little bit of wake with the launch to have you deal with it without becoming, when it bounces back off the walls, become sort of not manageable. But we need to be able to learn how to roll with not flat water, and even with wakes, and work with it. Now, the way that we do this is to increase our proficiency with using those pins. And here on the lagoon, you guys can get lazy, and many of you are, in terms of just like, well, this is good enough. Yeah, I hear them talking, but I don't really have to do that. And I'm saying, if you want to get outside of your little bathtub, you have to, because you're going to run into stuff. There's going to be wake. There's going to be stuff that happens. You have to be adaptable. I mean, because the racing is not just about waiting for everything that's ideal that shows up. You have to be able to adapt and roll, and it's unpredictable. I mean, you're out in the elements. The weather can change. I mean, here we got fog rolling in. There's all these different things that can come up, and we have to be able to keep our cool, still race aggressively, and do our best. I mean, it's a pity to be, we race so few. It's not like baseball, let's say, or softball. It's say, hey, we got a game, 2 times next week, no problem. You do a lot of training for a very few number of races. Even, for Masters Nationals, you stack them all into, a weekend, but if the weather's crappy or you've got other stuff going on, I mean, it's kind of it's a shame that you put all that training in and then just aren't able to do your best. So part of doing your best is really being able to mentally handle all the variabilities that come up. I mean, it's things like, hey, we haven't practiced this lineup before, and so I'm going to use it as midway through the race as an easy out or on the warm-up, and just not really try to come together and work together and do the best. It's like, that's just, why are you there? So the mental piece of this is big, and it's also something that we're not really able to get to a lot in the lagoon because it's only 1,000 meters. But we have to also be able to, some of the stuff I've been hitting you on is, we have to be consistent. This is internal. We have to look at those times and say 5 seconds variance is not acceptable. If I want to be competitive, I have to narrow that stuff down, so I'm just banging them out, consistent after consistent. Didn't feel good today. Don't care. Blast it out. Keep that speed. And this, by pushing yourself to kind of, here it's going to be numbers, and maybe if you've got somebody who's comparable speed when you're racing against, but a lot of this here is internal because we can only get 1,000 meters in, and then we have to spin. So you get all these nice breaks, which for head racing we're not going to get. You're going to have to clock out, 4.5, 5K, maybe 5.5K, whatever it is. And there's no stopping. There's no spinning. So we really have to make sure that we are being honest with ourselves to stay, even so here for training, we're spinning, we get right back on it. Take a little break, a little sip of water, it's like, go. So that hopefully we can do the mental training to be able to perform our best. Any more questions about that?
Yeah. I think it's, especially in racing, it's distractions. It's being distracted,
Right.
I mean, here we are, we even do Fridays, we race, we do things, but you get there and it starts and you're kind of, and then you think back of what the race was like, you were not in the same space. So that's what you just said. What are techniques or positive things that people do to stay in that?
Well, all right.
What
So
can we practice
for
to
many
stay in
for
that?
many places, the distraction is being able to do. I mean, the advantage of being able to train with other boats on a piece where you're just going up and you're doing pieces on a longer stretch of river, where you get into a tough spot and you just have to keep pushing because there are other boats right there. You can't quantify how valuable having other boats there to push you is. It is very difficult to become. I mean, there are some people. This is why the training centers for the national team are so important, because you need that sense of cutthroat, if you want to call it, camaraderie, to push people beyond where you would normally mentally say, like, this is good enough. It's very difficult to train solo to a high level. So even before you guys are saying, like, all right, so I have to find ways to keep myself brutally honest with, am I pushing myself? If I want to be a competitor, if I actually want to race, there is a lot of discomfort that comes with it. There's a lot of kind of coming up against these, they're mental barriers. The body says, ow, stop, and you're like, oh, well, this is probably good enough. It's like, if you got somebody right next to you, as I was talking about before you guys went to race, you don't know what they're thinking. The ESP isn't kicking in quite yet, so you think they're just fine. They're not going to stop, and so your body's saying stop, and your mind's like, well, okay, we'll stop, or we'll ease off a little bit. By having a person over there that keeps you honest and keeps you pushing through. And if you don't have that, then you use your speed coach. You set a number and you stick to it. And the wind comes up. I mean, these are things that you have to find ways to kind of keep yourself on task, because the mind is. I mean, if anybody who's done any kind of mindfulness activity, meditation, I mean, the mind is a tough one to discipline. It's always kind of finding little ways to work around it, and that's you. You're like, oh, well, it's okay. So we have to stay to task. I mean, it's one of the reasons why even just having group practices, it's like, oh, I could sleep in a little bit. It builds a sense of community so that we're all kind of accountable. It's tough as scholars because you could kind of just end up being like cats. You're just sort of doing your own thing. And there's some things with the rest of your life that are advantageous, and there's also pieces that kind of fall by the wayside with that, because you just don't. You miss practices. You do other things. Yeah, I'll get it in here. I didn't get it. Life comes up. And it's when you have this sort of something that's built on our little social programming, it keeps you on target. So to stay on task with the distractions, you find distractions here. You notice what they are, and then you work through them. And I mean, the distractions are, I mean, for the most part, if you're looking at consistency in your pieces, if you guys have your speed coaches, your little, electronic telemetry, you watch that. I mean, I've seen you guys erg, and sometimes I'm looking at the variability in terms of, this is why last winter I was talking about switching over to watts, because, even within when you're on 500-meter split, I mean, you could have a couple seconds in variability. It's like that, especially for longer pieces, that's too much. You switch over to watts and the numbers going all over the place. So you got to start narrowing that bandwidth. I mean, talk about when you get to, I mean, you might even get some of this on the collegiate end, but definitely when you start getting into the pre-elite and elite end. I mean, when people are talking about they want to do a PR, I mean, when you start really kind of refining the edge, like, I was 0.6 off my PR, my personal record, for whatever the piece is. There's a lot of mental discipline to stay on target, to kind of work through to try to get faster than whatever you pulled the previous time. I mean, you have to have the mental control to kind of just not listen to the distractions and stay on target with the task at hand, which is going fast. A lot of words. I don't know if that made any sense or anything. So there's lots of ways where you guys can do this here. Being able to communicate, so understanding who's comparable in speed for whatever pieces you're doing, and then making sure that you guys are doing these together, stacking up. We're going to start here, and we're going to do these pieces. So even if I'm 5 seconds faster than this other person, then I'm going to make sure that I'm pushing 5 to 6, and they're trying to close the gap. So you have ways of working that speed so you both get faster. Any other questions about that?
Mental toughness is the answer then, I guess, is what you're saying.
This is, I mean, that's really with rowing. I mean, it's a repetitive sport. I mean, the people that come out to rowing and so this is boring, it's like, they just don't get it. The people who really, I mean, from years of coaching, especially when initially working with novices coming in, there are certain people who, for whatever they've been doing prior in their lives, come in and like, something about the rowing, about the ability to kind of push yourself, get into that place of pain and go like, oh, this is fun. They're an odd mix. They're not the majority of the population, and these are the people that, yeah, you have to have that mental wiring or be geared to that to stick with it. Because if you're a sprinter, you know, if you're somebody who likes to play, I mean, I know this is being taped, but somebody who's not interested, I got a beef against softball. So you just kind of, there's a lot of standing around and waiting. I mean, like the physiological experience that you would have with any kind of endurance sport is not the same kind of sport you're going to have where there's all these timeouts and stuff. It's lots of great quotes online. I mean, but you're basically rowing. I mean, you're going into a hole and you just stay there for however long the race is. If it's a 2K, you're going to stay there for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to do a little more and the race is over. There aren't that many sports that have that sort of physiological demand on you, where you're getting your heart rate up that long and you say, yeah, and we're just going to stay here. So yeah, you have to have the mental discipline to do the training to be able to do that. And particularly for head racing, I mean, the 1,000 meters is like, yeah, you can, if you kind of duff it, okay, no problem. If you have a great one, great. It's only 1,000 meters, so it's over in, I think when it's some of the slower, I think with the wind or whatever we had, somebody clocked 5 something for one of their finals, but most of you guys were like the 3 range, some of you in the 4s. I mean, so it's over quick. You're talking about a head race, it's like, okay, check back in about 12 minutes, and then some. You got to have more discipline. You have to have mental toughness to stay on task and to stay on speed for that. And so for that, one of the ways that we have to really build this is we have to find a way to, how do we build our aerobic base? I mean, hopefully we've been doing a little bit of that already, but it's a sense of how do I get into a lower rate cruise and just keep throwing it down so that my heart rate's not going to get too high. So I'm feeling out where my heart rate is for this piece, and on the lagoon it's just down, spin quick, get right back into it. Spin quick, so you can get down, hopefully, most of you guys here have gotten pretty proficient with your spinning, so you can spin in like, 6 strokes. Spin and then go. There's none of this kind of, you give yourself maybe 30 seconds tops. Spin it around and take off again, so you keep your heart rate up. And so with the base rating, looking at doing stuff 22 and under. I mean, maybe for some of the lightweight ladies here, 22, but I mean, developing power, developing this ability to just keep the rating low enough so that I'm coming up, getting in, and and then just doing that again and again and again, and do that for, 45 minutes to an hour of steady state. So you build that, and if you don't do much stopping, then your mind is going to start to go like, oh, it's right on task again. So hopefully we will be doing more of that, and as with the technique, some of you guys, you guys have shown some, for the most part, you guys are all showing really nice improvement in technical applications, and it's like, awesome, good job. Now we have to put it into sort of practice, which is we put our body into a place where it's not comfortable, and then say, can we actually retain what we've been working on? Because that's racing. Whatever the distance, it's a sense of, we're going to go to where it's uncomfortable and say, can we stay focused? Or as Terry's mentioned, do we get distracted with, oh, the birds! Oh, it's like, It's like, you have to be just kind of cool and just through. Yeah, there's all this other stuff that's, I've rode with a couple people who are can really just sort of zone completely out, just kind of, but most everybody else, it seems pretty apparent. It's a constant negotiation of stuff coming up. Your mind gets sort of hectic, you get yourself, notice you're getting riled up, and it's breathe, come right back down. Particularly when you start doing pieces that are maybe, sort of 20, 24, 26. So if you're doing like 12-minute pieces, kind of, you know, a couple laps in the lagoon, or, you know, 20-minute pieces where it's a little higher rate, where, yeah, you really are starting to kind of get a little huff and puff. And those are hard to get here because there's those little breaks, and that's usually enough. But hopefully when we get out onto the longer stretches of water, we will do some of this. It's a practice of saying, like, can I stay just calm and focused? And I find myself getting riled up, breathe, bring that calm back, and just keep plugging away. And I have to practice that, because I cannot just miraculously pull it out of some orifice in the lower part of my body on race day and think it's all going to work, because it won't. So, any other questions about that? All right, so for today, so let's see, we got a, you know, nice glass, little foggy water, so I, you know, can't see you for too long. So what I'd like you guys to do is just see if you can find some time here to kind of do whatever your drill is that you've been plugging away at. You do your drill, you get yourselves warmed up, and then for the nice water here, at some point we are working non-full feather. We can do that one we can do with steady state. We can do a lot of it. And remember, the objective here is to be able to get you guys to the point where your blades are off the water. You're worried about wake, you're worried about chop, get your blades off the water. Stable off the water, and then get them back in at full compression. You don't have to do it when the water's like glass. But when you start getting ripples, if you've got ripples and you're bouncing all over the place, it's going to be really cool. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to enhance your calm, because your body's bouncing all over the place. So you got to learn how to get your blades off the water. So as a general rule, when I see you guys rolling by and if I see both blades on the water, I know you're getting lazy. I mean, I don't always call you out on it, you know, viciously, but I can see it. You know, at this point, it's pretty hard to kind of pull one over, just BS me. I'll just let you slide on it, but, you know. So get your blades off the water. And the objective here, like a day like today, it should be every stroke.
Should we do anything, since we're going ahead, Susan, in our pieces here to help us improve our steering? I mean, you know,
the steering,
rarely look behind ourselves. You know?
I have, yes, I have noticed that. Yeah, the ability to steer. Yeah, we want to make sure that. Since you bring it up, I'll just mention it again. So we are developing the capacity to look over our shoulder while on the drive, say every several strokes. Since you guys are familiar with what's going on, it's like, okay, fine, I'll just kind of gauge off the wall where I'm at. But you have to be able to steer, especially for a course like Boston. You have to be able to not only look at where your stern is pointed, but take a few glances over at various points to make sure that you know where you're heading, and be able to do it on the fly without having to sort of look at the finish, which is going to kill your rating and your speed. See, there's these little looks that you're going to do, one shoulder or the other, depending on what you're approaching on the drive, and then you may, it's some one or two places in the race, there may be a point where you do a full look over to kind of get a gauge of what the traffic is, where you are, you know, get the lay of the land. The nice thing about Boston now is, I mean, there are videos available online where somebody's actually flopped a GoPro camera on the bow, so you can get and the stern, so you can get a whole view of what it looks like at water level. So it's so much easier than it was years ago, where you just had to kind of like know the course. Now you can just watch the video. If you watch it enough, you'll start to get aware of the landmarks. You'll know what bridges are what. So, you know, then it's just simply a matter of time and exposure. For some of the other races, I don't believe that those are. I'm sure not for Rockford, but Rockford's are pretty much a straight shot. It's just, you know, don't really boats. Although I'm curious about this course for the Head of the Fox that they're looking to put out in St. Charles. That what I gathered from talking to Alex, that sounds like it's going to be a little more of a winding course, which should be interesting. But that's probably just going to be a wing it as you go. So yeah, so even just the practicing, particularly when you're doing steady state, is that little glance, and then there's, you know, so again, there's these little pieces. You're coming up somewhere kind of after you engage. There's just a little look over one shoulder or the other, so you get kind of most of what's ahead of you, and then at some points, you know, you're just going to kind of do a full look, make sure you know what's going on. So you just practice that. But it's just as a general safety rule, I would say, yeah, it would be best if you guys really did. I think it was, what was it, last week? Saturday? No, Wednesday. I thought Wednesday. And there was like, I was talking to people, and there were at least on 3 occasions where other boats came rolling right up on me in a launch, and I was talking to somebody, and we had to holler out. Because people weren't looking. So don't do that. Look. Okay? Any other questions or anything else? No? Groovy. Okay, so let's get out and we'll do one drill and then get you with that non-full feather, getting our blades off the water.